listening to
Catholic Sprout,
the daily podcast for Catholic kids that strives to plant seeds of faith.
Hey there, Sprouts. Today is Tuesday, January 28th, 2025. Today is also the feast day of a great doctor of the church, St. Thomas Aquinas. St. Thomas lived in the 1200s in Italy. He was from a very important family, born in a castle, and they thought that he would go to join an important religious order like the Benedictines. But instead, he joined a brand new order of poor preachers called the Dominicans. His family was not happy about this. They did all sorts of things to stop him. But in the end, God cleared a way. He went to the University of Paris, studied under another saint, St. Albert the Great. He excelled not only in academic pursuits, but also in holiness. He was a very holy priest dedicated to the Eucharist and Holy Mass. He left behind some incredible writings that are still studied by the church today. And at the end of his life, while saying Holy Mass, he had a vision of Jesus. Following that vision, he looked at all of his writings and all of his accomplishments and saw that they were nothing compared to what he had seen in that vision, and he died shortly after. Now, this week on the Catholic Sprouts podcast, we are talking about Orthodoxy, which is right belief or purity of faith. One of the cornerstones of our faith as Christianity is that the belief that Jesus is not a myth or a legend, that he truly was alive. He was God made man, that he lived, he died, and he rose from the dead. And so this week I am sharing some real places that Jesus spent time, his final 20 hours of life. Over the past several months, I studied the Gospels really intently, trying to put together a timeline of the last 20 hours of Jesus' life. And the Gospels are very clear to give us time markers of when things happened. It's very interesting to put those into the hours of a day so you can understand how exhausted Jesus was, that it was dark or that it was light outside, what other people might have been doing. And so the first place that Jesus was during this time frame, of course, was the upper room where he celebrated the Last Supper with his disciples. He did a lot of teaching while he was there. He washed the feet of his disciples, but he also instituted the Eucharist. He shared his body and blood in bread and wine for the first time there. After this, he sang songs with his disciples, and they left to walk to the garden. Now, if you look at a map of ancient Jerusalem, this was quite a walk, and they would have been walking in the dark, arriving in the garden probably after 11 p.m. So you can imagine everybody was tired. I'm very tired at 11 p.m. And although Jesus asked them to sit down and pray, we know what happened. Most of them fell asleep. So Jesus goes off and prays by himself, and the gospel includes many interesting details, that he was in such agony that he sweated blood, that he was there, and the gospels also say that he was probably there praying until 2 p.m., and it was at that time that Judas appeared to betray him. Now let's pause and stay in the garden for a moment. It's very interesting to look at pictures of the Garden of Gethsemane, that it was full of probably very small olive trees, that as Jesus was praying, he was leaned up against a large stone. The stone is still there. You could still go and visit it. And also that as they were there, they were outside of the city walls. There was probably all sorts of insect and animal noises from the night, that it was still, that the moon was shining down on them, and that all alone in his agony, Jesus sat there and prayed, returning a couple of times to his close disciples, Peter, James, and John, to ask them to stay awake with him, even though they repeatedly fell asleep. And so as we just really contemplate our own faith, as we discuss Orthodoxy this week, it's important that we pause and spend time with Jesus in our imagination. Remember, Jesus was a real person. He really spent those hours in that garden where you can still go today with those small olive trees, with that rock. Blood really came out of his pores as he went through such tremendous agony knowing what was coming. And so for us to have Orthodox faith, we need to believe with our whole heart that those things happened, that Jesus was free to choose whether he was going to suffer or die for us or not. And he chose love. Now, tomorrow we're going to move on to the next place that Jesus is taken after the garden, and that's Caiaphas' house. I'll share the kind of time frame that he was there and the various places he was at according to tradition. But again, let's just really strive to stay with Jesus and use our imagination to understand where this real human being, fully God, fully man, was during this pivotal part of his life.
That's it for Catholic Sprouts today. We'll be back tomorrow, but until then, continue to grow in your faith and truly sprout into the beautiful creation that God created you to be.
Thank you so much for listening to the Catholic Sprouts podcast. Our Stay With Me Lenten devotional study for Catholic youth is on sale this week. As we explain in the podcast this week, this is a detailed look at the final 20 hours of Jesus' life. You will truly enter into his passion moment by moment, listen to the words he spoke, see what he saw, and hopefully feel his love for you in a whole new way. The Lenten devotional is at our special launch price this week that will end at the end of this week. And we also expect to be sold out before too long. So if you or your children would like to take this very special walk with Jesus this Lent, rediscover his love for you and find a way to stay near him, I encourage you to check the notes for this podcast episode for the direct link to get a copy of Stay With Me.
This podcast is part of the Spoke Street Network. For more great podcasts, visit spokestreet.com.